Looking back, my life has been a whirlwind of chasing dreams, daring to believe, and falling flat on my face. It wasn't for lack of trying or ambition, those I had in spades. But I guess, in my younger years, I lacked direction and the wisdom to see when an idea was nothing more than a castle in the sand. Let me take you to the beginning of my journey, a chapter of countless ideas and just as many disappointments. I was a restless soul, always searching for the next big thing that would make me rich, or at least successful enough to breathe easily at night. It started with a franchise idea in my early 20s. A friend introduced me to a network marketing scheme that promised financial freedom. Sell these health supplements, he said, and you'll be on the fast track to millions. I bought in, investing what little savings I had, even borrowing some from my dad. A move I'd regret more times than I could count. For months, I hustled. I pitched to everyone I knew and cold-called strangers. I even gave out free samples at the park on weekends. But no matter how many late nights I spent strategizing or how many motivational tapes I listened to, the returns were dismal. By the end of the year, I was left with a mountain of unsold inventory and more debt than I'd started with. My next endeavor was flipping used cars. I'd heard about a guy who made a killing buying clunkers, fixing them up, and reselling them at a profit. This is it, I thought. I'd always been handy with tools and figured I could learn the ropes. I spent hours scouring classified ads for cheap vehicles and weekends elbow-deep in grease, trying to breathe life into them. I even roped in my cousin, a mechanic, to help. We managed to flip a few cars, and for a brief moment, it felt like I was onto something. But then came the setbacks. A car with a blown transmission that ate all my profits, another that failed a pre-sale inspection, and a third that sat in my driveway for months, unwanted. The overhead was too high, the risk too great, and my dream of easy money evaporated. Then there was the time I tried my hand at e-commerce. Inspired by stories of overnight successes on platforms like eBay, I jumped in, selling everything from vintage vinyl records to novelty t-shirts. My apartment turned into a chaotic warehouse, with piles of merchandise and packing supplies in every corner. But the market was saturated, and my attempts to stand out fell flat. Returns, negative reviews, and slow sales drained my enthusiasm and my wallet. My wife, Karen, watched all of this with a mix of support and growing concern. We'd married young, and were still figuring out how to navigate life together. Karen was my anchor, but I could see the worry in her eyes as one venture after another failed. I'd promised her a life of stability and adventure, yet here we were, drowning in uncertainty. The lowest point came when I poured our remaining savings into a tech startup idea. It was an app designed to help people manage their grocery shopping more efficiently, a niche I thought was brilliant. I hired a developer to bring my vision to life and spent months refining the concept. But when it launched, the reception was lukewarm. Downloads trickled in, and users abandoned it just as quickly. It turned out I wasn't solving a problem people actually cared about. By the time I shut it down, I was burnt out. I'd lost not only money but also a piece of myself. The optimism that had driven me through countless sleepless nights was gone. I felt like a failure, a man who'd squandered every opportunity and dragged his family down with him. Sitting on the couch one evening, I stared blankly at the pile of bills on the coffee table. Karen sat beside me, her hand on mine. "We'll figure it out," she said softly, but I could hear the strain in her voice, the unspoken plea for me to stop chasing pipe dreams and find something, anything, that would work. I started taking odd jobs, doing whatever I could to keep us afloat. I mowed lawns, delivered pizzas, and even worked as a handyman for a while. These weren't glamorous jobs, but they put food on the table and gave me time to reflect. I realized I'd been chasing the wrong things: money, prestige, quick success, instead of focusing on what truly mattered. It was during one of these odd jobs that a seed of an idea took root. A client, an elderly woman named Mrs. Hargrove, insisted on paying me with homemade pastries when I fixed her leaky faucet. Karen and I devoured them that evening, marveling at their rich, buttery flavor. Karen joked, "Maybe you should learn to bake. You could give Mrs. Hargrove a run for her money." We laughed, but the idea lingered. The next day, I found myself browsing baking tutorials online. Something about it felt grounding. Unlike my past ventures, It wasn't about algorithms or inventory turnover. It was about creating something tangible, something that brought joy. I didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would change our lives in ways we couldn't have imagined. The idea of baking kept gnawing at me, a quiet whisper amidst the chaos of our lives. Karen was amused at first, watching me attempt my first loaf of bread in our tiny kitchen. Flour dusted the counters, my shirt, and even the floor by the time I was done. The result? A dense, brick-like monstrosity that could have doubled as a paperweight. But instead of discouraging me, it sparked something deep within. Baking became my escape. Every evening after my odd jobs, I'd come home, pull out a recipe, and try again. Karen joined me, her laughter echoing through the kitchen as we stumbled through the learning curve together. There was something magical about those moments. Kneading dough, waiting for it to rise, and pulling golden, fragrant loaves from the oven. For the first time in years, I felt connected to something real. Of course, there were plenty of disasters. Like the time I forgot the salt in a batch of rolls, leaving them bland and lifeless. Or the night I accidentally left a pan of croissants in the oven too long, setting off the smoke alarm and nearly giving Karen a heart attack. But with every failure, I learned, baking wasn't just a hobby. It was becoming a passion. Mrs. Hargrove's encouragement fueled my newfound obsession. She'd stop by occasionally, bringing her own pastries for us to sample. "You're getting better," she'd say, offering tips and tricks she'd picked up over decades of baking for her family. She became my mentor, guiding me through the nuances of proofing dough and achieving the perfect crust. It didn't take long for Karen to suggest turning this hobby into something more. "You've tried so many things," she said one night as we shared a warm baguette fresh from the oven. "But this feels different. It feels right." Her words planted a seed of hope, fragile but persistent. Could baking be the answer? Could this be the path that finally led us out of the shadow of failure? I wasn't sure, but for the first time in a long while, I wanted to try. We decided to test the waters by selling a few baked goods at the local farmer's market. It was a modest start, a card table borrowed from a neighbor, a simple sign that read, "Fresh baked goodies," and a basket of muffins, cookies, and loaves. Karen and I stayed up late the night before, working side by side to prepare. The response was overwhelming. People stopped by, drawn by the aroma of fresh bread. They smiled, complimented our products, and bought more than we dared to hope for. One customer, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache, bit into a chocolate chip cookie and exclaimed, "This tastes like my childhood." It was the best compliment I'd ever received. That first market day was a turning point. We didn't just make a little money. We found validation. Strangers, real people, liked what we made. It was a small victory, but to me, it felt monumental. For the first time, I dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could build something meaningful. Over the next few weeks, we poured ourselves into refining our recipes and preparing for the market. Karen handled the business side, pricing, customer interactions, and keeping track of sales, while I focused on baking. It was exhausting but exhilarating. Every loaf, every cookie, every pie was a step towards something greater. Then, an opportunity presented itself that neither of us could have predicted. A small storefront in our neighborhood went up for lease. It was a humble space, barely big enough for a proper kitchen and a few display shelves, but it was affordable. Karen's eyes lit up when she saw it. "This could be it," she said, her excitement contagious. I hesitated. The failures of the past still weighed heavily on me, a constant reminder of how easily dreams could crumble. But Karen's unwavering faith gave me courage. "Let's do it," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt inside. With trembling hands, we signed the lease. It was a leap of faith, a gamble that could either lift us out of the ashes or plunge us deeper into uncertainty. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of failing. I was afraid of not trying. The day we got the keys to our tiny storefront was a mixture of elation and pure terror. The space had clearly seen better days. Cracked tiles on the floor, peeling paint on the walls, and a musty smell that hinted at years of neglect. But Karen saw potential where I saw decay. "This will be beautiful," she said, her voice brimming with confidence, as she ran her fingers along the counter that had once displayed someone else's wares. The first week was spent scrubbing, painting, and patching up every imperfection we could manage. We worked late into the nights, powered by fast food and sheer determination. Karen took the lead in planning the layout, sketching out a vision of where the display cases would go and how the tiny kitchen in the back would be organized. Meanwhile, I focused on acquiring equipment, a used mixer here, a second-hand oven there, stretching every dollar to its limit. It wasn't just about the physical transformation. It was about building something from the ground up, together. Each brushstroke of paint, each screw tightened, felt like a piece of ourselves being poured into this venture. The more we worked, the more I began to believe that maybe we could pull this off. Our families, who had been skeptical about yet another one of my ideas, began to rally behind us. Karen's mom spent hours cleaning the windows until they sparkled, while my younger brother helped me install the shelves. Even Mrs. Hargrove stopped by with a basket of cookies, her eyes twinkling with pride as she inspected our progress. "This place is going to be special," she said, squeezing my arm. As the opening day approached, the pressure mounted. We stayed up late perfecting recipes, debating over menu options, and agonizing over every little detail. What if no one came? What if the bakery failed before it even started? The fear was suffocating, but Karen's unwavering optimism kept me grounded. "People will come," she said, her voice steady as she labeled jars of homemade jam to sell alongside our baked goods. "They'll come because they can feel the love we've put into this." The morning of our grand opening dawned bright and crisp, the kind of day that felt like a good omen. We'd placed flyers around the neighborhood and posted announcements on local forums. But the truth was, we had no idea what to expect. Karen and I stood behind the counter, the smell of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls filling the air, and waited. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, each one amplifying my doubt. Just as I was beginning to think we'd made a terrible mistake, the bell above the door jingled. A young woman stepped inside, her face lighting up as she inhaled deeply. "Wow, it smells amazing in here," she said, walking straight to the counter. She bought a baguette and a dozen cookies, chatting with Karen as if they were old friends. Moments later, another customer walked in, and then another. Soon, the little shop was buzzing with life. The relief was overwhelming. Every smile, every compliment, every sale felt like validation, a tiny step toward proving that we were on the right path. By the end of the day, we were exhausted but euphoric. We'd sold out of nearly everything and received enough encouragement to fuel our spirits for weeks to come. But as the high of that first day began to fade, reality crept back in. The bakery was a hit, but it was only the beginning. Success wasn't guaranteed, and the challenges ahead loomed large. Could we sustain the momentum? Could we handle the long hours, the financial strain, and the inevitable setbacks? For now, though, we allowed ourselves a moment to savor the victory. As Karen and I locked up the shop that night, she leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "We did it. We really did it." And for the first time in years, I believed her. The days that followed our grand opening were a blur of activity, excitement, and a growing sense of responsibility. Word of mouth spread quickly in our small community. The bakery became a hub for morning commuters craving fresh coffee and croissants, parents looking for treats for their kids, and even the elderly seeking a slice of nostalgia in the form of a perfectly baked pie. But with success came new challenges. The initial rush of customers was exhilarating, but it didn't take long to realize that keeping up with demand was going to test us in ways we hadn't anticipated. Our little kitchen, though full of heart, was woefully undersized for the volume we were producing. By the end of the first week, Karen and I were both running on fumes, our enthusiasm tempered by sheer exhaustion. "We need help," Karen said one evening, her voice heavy with fatigue as she kneaded dough for the next morning's bread. Her hands moved methodically, but I could see the weariness in her eyes. She was right, of course. As much as I wanted to believe we could handle it all on our own, the reality was clear. If we didn't find a way to scale up, the bakery would collapse under the weight of its own success. So we started small. Karen convinced her younger sister, Mia, to help out part-time. Mia was in college and eager to make some extra cash, and she brought a youthful energy to the shop that customers seemed to love. Her bubbly personality and knack for decorating cupcakes quickly made her a favorite among regulars. We also began to explore ways to improve efficiency. Karen, Ever the organizer, spent hours researching commercial-grade equipment, comparing prices, and figuring out how we could stretch our limited budget to invest in tools that would make our lives easier. We eventually purchased a larger oven and a dough mixer that felt like a godsend. For the first time, I wasn't waking up at 3 a.m. to mix everything by hand. Still, not everything went smoothly. One particularly hectic morning, the new oven broke down just as the breakfast rush was starting. Panic set in as customers lined up, expecting their usual warm pastries. I could feel my heart racing as I tried to fix the oven, sweat dripping down my forehead. Karen, ever composed, quickly pivoted, offering free coffee to the waiting crowd while I scrambled to get the machine running again. It was a small disaster, but the way we handled it taught me something important. Setbacks were inevitable, but how we responded to them would define us. By the time the oven was up and running again, the customers were still there, sipping their coffee and chatting among themselves. Some even cheered when we finally pulled out the first tray of freshly baked goods. Moments like that reminded me why we'd started this journey. It wasn't just about the bread or the profits. It was about creating something that brought people together, a place where they could feel warmth and community. As the weeks turned into months, the bakery became just that. Regular customers began to feel like friends. There was Mrs. Dawson, who came every Thursday for a loaf of sourdough and always brought her dog, Max, to wait patiently outside. And Mr. Patel, who swore our chocolate muffins were the only thing that got him through his night shifts at the hospital. Even as we settled into a rhythm, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something bigger. The bakery was thriving, but it was also stretching us to our limits. How far could we go before the cracks started to show? And more importantly, how could we protect what we'd built without losing ourselves in the process? The answers weren't clear, but one thing was certain. We weren't turning back now. Scaling the bakery wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a necessity dictated by the relentless demand from our growing customer base. The success of our little storefront had spilled into the local community, and with it came opportunities that seemed too good to pass up. Each one was a potential windfall or disaster. The first significant breakthrough came in the form of a wholesale partnership with a local cafe owner. He approached us, impressed by the buzz surrounding our pastries, and proposed carrying our baked goods in his shop. While it was flattering and exciting, the logistics were daunting. Doubling production overnight was no small feat. Our modest kitchen was already bursting at the seams, and our workforce consisted of Karen, me, and her sister Mia, who helped part-time. Still, we decided to seize the opportunity. The cafe partnership was the validation we needed to take our bakery to the next level. To meet the demand, we hired Sam and Linda, two part-time bakers who brought a wealth of experience. Sam, reserved but meticulous, had a knack for creating consistent quality. Linda, with years of experience in large-scale bakeries, brought efficiency and a steady hand that our operation desperately needed. The added help was transformative. With Linda's guidance, we reorganized our production line, shaving valuable minutes off each process. Sam's ability to troubleshoot recipes kept our pastries consistent, even as we increased output. For the first time, the kitchen felt less like controlled chaos and more like a functioning machine. It was exhilarating and exhausting. But scaling up wasn't just about the mechanics of baking. Unexpected hurdles came at every turn. One night, during a storm, the entire neighborhood lost power just as we prepared the first delivery for the cafe. Our carefully scheduled routine came to a screeching halt. Karen scrambled to find flashlights while I frantically called the power company. With hours ticking by and no resolution in sight, the weight of failure loomed large. Linda's calm pragmatism saved the day. She suggested we reroute the backup generator to power one oven. It meant prioritizing the most popular items for the cafe while letting the rest wait. By candlelight, we divided tasks. Karen organized the packaging, Sam prepped the next batch, and Linda monitored the lone oven like a hawk. It was far from perfect, but by dawn, we had salvaged enough to fulfill the order. The cafe owner's gratitude made the effort worthwhile, but the experience was a sobering reminder of how precarious our operation still was. As the weeks rolled on, other challenges surfaced. A supplier mix-up left us short on critical ingredients one weekend, forcing us to improvise recipes. A burst pipe flooded the kitchen during a busy Saturday, nearly bringing everything to a halt. Each incident tested our resolve and stretched our ingenuity to its limits. But with every challenge came lessons, small innovations that made us stronger and more resilient. We also learned the importance of community. Regular customers stepped up in unexpected ways. One of them, a retired plumber, helped fix the pipe disaster on short notice, refusing payment beyond a loaf of sourdough. Another time, Mrs. Dawson, a loyal patron, dropped off fresh eggs from her backyard hens when she heard about our ingredient shortage. Their generosity reminded us why we'd started this journey in the first place. By the end of the first 6 months, the bakery had grown beyond anything we'd imagined. The cafe partnership flourished, bringing in steady revenue. Our storefront buzzed with activity daily, with regulars and new faces alike. Despite the long hours and constant challenges, there was a palpable sense of achievement. Still, the rapid growth came with its own pressures. Karen and I often found ourselves working late into the night, reviewing numbers and strategizing for the next phase. There were moments when the exhaustion threatened to overwhelm us, but we always came back to one unshakable truth. This bakery was more than a business. It was our chance to build something lasting, something meaningful. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine what the future could hold. Expansion, perhaps. A second location, maybe even a catering service. The possibilities felt endless, as long as we could keep rising to meet them. The bakery's momentum felt unstoppable, until the day it nearly derailed entirely. We had just begun planning for a second location, buoyed by consistent sales and Karen's meticulous financial management. But fate, as it so often does, had other plans. It started with a phone call that came late on a Monday evening, just as we were closing the shop. The voice on the other end was curt. Our landlord had decided to sell the building, and the new owner had no interest in renewing our lease. We had 6 months to vacate. The news hit like a sledgehammer. This wasn't just a building. It was the heartbeat of our operation, the space where we had poured every ounce of energy and care into creating something special. Losing it meant not just the cost of relocation, but the risk of losing our customers, our momentum, and perhaps the dream itself. Panic set in, but Karen's resolve remained unshaken. She dove headfirst into finding a solution, combing through property listings, and meeting with real estate agents. I threw myself into ensuring the day-to-day operations of the bakery didn't falter, even as the weight of uncertainty pressed down on us. After weeks of searching, we found a potential new space, larger, better equipped, and situated in a bustling part of town. It was a chance to upgrade, but the price tag was staggering. Securing the lease would require us to drain nearly every bit of savings we had built, along with taking on a loan that would stretch us thin for years. It was a gamble of enormous proportions. We decided to go for it. The transition was a logistical nightmare. Moving the bakery's equipment, setting up the new kitchen, and navigating permits felt like trying to juggle flaming torches. Meanwhile, customers grew anxious about the temporary closure. Some found other bakeries to frequent, and the fear of losing their loyalty gnawed at me constantly. Then, midway through the move, disaster struck. During transport, our primary commercial oven, the backbone of our production, was damaged beyond repair. Replacing it would cost thousands, and there was no room for delays. Desperation took hold, and for days I barely slept, hunting for solutions. Finally, through a stroke of luck and the generosity of a former supplier, we secured a refurbished oven at a fraction of the cost. It wasn't ideal, but it would keep us afloat. The reopening of the bakery in its new location was a mix of triumph and exhaustion. The expanded space allowed us to serve more customers and streamline operations, but the financial strain loomed large. Every day felt like a balancing act on the edge of a cliff, one misstep away from catastrophe. Yet, amidst the chaos, there were glimmers of hope. Regulars began to return, drawn by the same warmth and quality they had always loved. New customers, intrigued by the buzz surrounding our move, began to trickle in. Slowly, the bakery regained its footing. The experience left scars, though. Karen and I had weathered storms before, but this was different. The stakes were higher, the risks more acute. We had bet everything on this expansion, and the cost of failure would be catastrophic. But as the days turned to weeks and the weeks to months, the bakery began to thrive once more. Looking back, the move was a turning point. It forced us to confront the fragility of our dream and the resilience we didn't know we had. The new location became more than just a fresh start. It was a testament to what we could endure and achieve together. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't dared to in a long while: hope. The bakery had regained its rhythm after the tumultuous move, but the scars of the transition ran deep. Financially, we were walking a tightrope. Every month's earnings were meticulously allocated, leaving no room for error. It felt like we were thriving on paper, but in reality, the tension was palpable. The breaking point came during what should have been a celebration. Karen had orchestrated a launch for our new catering service, an idea born from customer requests and our desire to diversify revenue. We invested in new packaging, hired temporary staff, and spent weeks perfecting a menu tailored to events and corporate clients. The initial feedback was promising. Our first few orders were met with glowing reviews. For a moment, it seemed like the gamble was paying off. Then came the disaster. It was a large corporate event, our biggest order yet. We had spent days preparing, working late into the night to ensure everything was flawless. But as the delivery van pulled up to the venue, disaster struck. A coolant leak in the refrigeration unit had gone unnoticed, spoiling an entire batch of desserts. The main attraction, a 3-tiered chocolate and raspberry cake, was ruined. The event coordinator, understandably furious, demanded an explanation. I scrambled to salvage what I could, offering partial refunds and replacements, but the damage was done. Word of the mishap spread quickly, and within days, inquiries for catering slowed to a trickle. It felt like watching months of hard work unravel in an instant. Karen and I spent sleepless nights analyzing what went wrong. The coolant issue was a technical failure, but the broader problem was clear. We had stretched ourselves too thin. Between running the storefront, managing wholesale orders, and now catering, the cracks in our foundation were beginning to show. Every system we had relied on was under strain, and the smallest disruption threatened to topple everything. But giving up wasn't an option. Instead, we took a hard look at our operations. Karen led the charge, reorganizing schedules and delegating more responsibilities to our team. We tightened quality control measures and invested in better equipment, even if it meant further straining our budget. I focused on rebuilding trust with clients, offering discounts and guarantees to entice them back. The road to recovery was slow and painful. We operated on razor-thin margins, constantly firefighting new challenges. A month after the catering debacle, a water main break in the area left us without running water for 2 full days. The bakery had to shut down temporarily, costing us critical revenue. When the pipes were finally repaired, we reopened with a promotion, offering free coffee to customers. It drew crowds, but the strain on our resources was evident. Amidst all this, Karen and I started to feel the personal toll of our ambitions. Long hours at the bakery meant less time at home, and our conversations often revolved around finances and logistics rather than dreams and aspirations. The weight of keeping everything afloat created an invisible wall between us, one we were both too tired to address directly. But even in the darkest moments, there were sparks of light. Regulars continued to support us, some going out of their way to spread the word about the bakery. One elderly customer, a retired teacher, wrote a glowing review on a popular blog that brought in a wave of new patrons. Small gestures like these reminded us why we had started this journey in the first place. The turning point came unexpectedly. A local food critic visited the bakery, drawn by the buzz surrounding our struggles and the quality of our goods. Her review, published in the city's largest newspaper, was glowing. She praised our resilience and authenticity, calling our croissants the best outside of Paris. The impact was immediate. Customers flocked to the bakery, and catering inquiries began to pick up again. With renewed momentum, Karen and I decided to scale back our ambitions temporarily. We reduced catering orders to manageable levels and focused on stabilizing the storefront. It wasn't the grand expansion we had envisioned, but it was sustainable. Slowly, the bakery found its footing again. Looking back, that period was both the most challenging and the most transformative. It forced us to confront the limits of our capabilities and the cost of unchecked ambition. We emerged from it scarred but stronger, with a clearer understanding of what mattered most. The bakery wasn't just a business. It was a reflection of our perseverance, our community, and our partnership. And as we moved forward, we carried those lessons with us, determined never to lose sight of what we had built. The bakery's resurgence after the struggles of the past year felt nothing short of miraculous. Bolstered by the glowing review and a steadily increasing customer base, Karen and I finally dared to dream big again. This time, however, we approached growth with cautious optimism, meticulously planning every step to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. The first significant milestone was securing a second location. Unlike the chaotic scramble of our last move, this decision was deliberate. We spent months scouting neighborhoods, analyzing foot traffic, and negotiating lease terms. The space we chose was in a bustling commercial district, surrounded by offices and high-end boutiques. It was a gamble, but one rooted in the confidence we had built from years of experience. To manage the expansion, we established a clear division of labor. Karen took charge of finances and logistics, ensuring the new location opened without a hitch, while I focused on training staff and replicating the quality that had made us a local favorite. We recruited a team of skilled bakers and baristas, carefully vetting each one to maintain the bakery's standards. Linda and Sam, now full-time employees, took on leadership roles, mentoring the newcomers and overseeing day-to-day operations. Opening day at the new location was a resounding success. Lines stretched down the block as curious patrons and loyal customers flocked to see what we had created. The space was larger, brighter, and more polished than our original storefront, but it retained the cozy charm that had always been our hallmark. By the end of the first week, sales exceeded our projections, and Karen and I allowed ourselves a rare evening off to celebrate. As the months went by, the second location proved to be a game-changer. Corporate clients from nearby offices began placing large catering orders, and the foot traffic brought in a steady stream of new customers. The increased revenue allowed us to pay off debts, upgrade equipment, and even start planning for a third location. For the first time in years, the pressure eased, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and stability. But success, as we learned, came with its own challenges. Managing two locations required constant communication and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Inventory mix-ups became a recurring headache, and occasional missteps, like an underbaked batch of bread or a missed catering order, threatened to tarnish our reputation. Each mistake felt amplified by the stakes we were playing for, and the stress of maintaining perfection began to take its toll. There were also new dynamics to navigate. The original storefront, though still profitable, began to feel overshadowed by the success of its younger sibling. Regulars at the first location noticed the difference, and some lamented the shift in focus. Karen and I worked hard to reassure them, hosting special events and rolling out exclusive menu items to remind them how much we valued their loyalty. Despite the occasional hiccups, the bakery thrived. The third location opened a year later, this time in a suburban area where families lined up for our fresh pastries and weekend brunch specials. By now, the bakery had become more than just a local favorite. It was a brand. We invested in sleek packaging, launched a social media campaign, and even started selling branded merchandise. Seeing customers walk out with bags bearing our logo felt surreal, a tangible symbol of how far we had come. Looking back, that period felt like a dream. Karen and I often marveled at how the bakery had grown from a single storefront struggling to make ends meet to a mini-empire with 3 thriving locations. We were finally living the vision we had dared to imagine all those years ago, and the sense of accomplishment was intoxicating. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. The relentless pace of growth left little time for reflection, and decisions that once felt deliberate now came with a sense of urgency. We had built an intricate web of operations, and any disruption threatened to unravel the whole structure. Karen, ever the realist, began to voice concerns about the sustainability of our expansion, while I found myself clinging to the belief that we could handle anything. The success was thrilling, but it was also precarious. Deep down, we both knew that one wrong move could send everything tumbling down. We just didn't know when or how it would happen. For now, though, we pushed those fears aside and focused on the present. The bakery was at its peak, a beacon of what hard work and resilience could achieve. It was everything we had dreamed of and more. And yet, In the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that dreams, like pastries, can be delicate things, beautiful but fragile. The unraveling began in small, almost imperceptible ways. It was the sort of decline you don't notice until you're already halfway down the slope. A missed invoice here, a delayed shipment there. Minor setbacks that seemed manageable on their own but began to accumulate like water seeping through cracks in a dam. The first major blow came from our suppliers. A sudden spike in raw material costs sent our expenses soaring. Flour prices doubled almost overnight due to an unexpected drought in a major farming region. Then came the butter shortage, a ripple effect of international trade disputes. The financial cushion we had painstakingly built over the years began to erode, forcing us to increase prices just to stay afloat. Customers noticed. Some grumbled about the higher costs, while others quietly drifted to cheaper alternatives. Foot traffic at all 3 locations began to decline, a slow but steady drop that sent chills down my spine every time I glanced at the sales reports. Karen worked tirelessly to adjust, finding creative ways to cut costs without sacrificing quality, but the margins were razor-thin. The catering business, once a pillar of our growth, took a major hit when a high-profile client canceled a lucrative contract. Their explanation was vague, but we later learned they had partnered with a larger, more established competitor. It was a devastating blow, not just financially but emotionally. We had poured so much effort into building that relationship, only to see it evaporate in an instant. As revenue dwindled, so did morale. Our once tight-knit team began to fray under the pressure. Linda and Sam, who had been with us since the early days, started voicing frustrations about the long hours and mounting workload. Turnover among newer employees skyrocketed, leaving us perpetually understaffed and scrambling to cover shifts. The bakery, once a source of pride and joy, had become a battlefield. The second major blow came in the form of an economic downturn. A slowdown in the local economy hit small businesses particularly hard, and we were no exception. Corporate clients scaled back catering orders, and families tightened their budgets, cutting out luxuries like artisan pastries. Even our most loyal customers began to visit less frequently. Their absence felt like a silent rebuke. Then came the fire. It started in the kitchen of our second location, a grease trap malfunction that quickly spiraled out of control. By the time firefighters arrived, the damage was extensive. The building was deemed unsafe, and repairs would take months, if not longer. Insurance covered some of the costs, but the loss of revenue from one of our busiest locations was a blow we couldn't afford. Desperation set in. Karen and I held late-night meetings, poring over spreadsheets and brainstorming ways to keep the business alive. We considered closing the third location to consolidate resources, but ultimately decided against it, hoping against hope that things would turn around. They didn't. One by one, the dominoes fell. The landlord of our original storefront raised the rent, citing the area's rising property values. It was the final straw. Unable to negotiate better terms, we made the heartbreaking decision to close the shop that had started it all. Standing in the empty space on its final day, I felt a wave of grief so profound it left me speechless. By the end of the year, we were left with only the suburban location, the smallest and least profitable of the 3. It was a shadow of what we had once built, a tiny remnant of the dream we had worked so hard to achieve. Karen and I scaled back to running it almost entirely on our own, letting go of the last of our staff. The bustling energy of our peak years was gone, replaced by quiet mornings and subdued afternoons. Sitting behind the counter one day, watching the sun stream through the windows, I realized how much we had lost. The bakery had been our everything, a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope. Now it was a single thread, barely holding us together. And yet, in that fragile thread, there was something that still felt worth holding on to. Karen, ever the optimist, reminded me that even in loss, there was opportunity. "We still have this," she said, gesturing to the humble space around us. "And as long as we do, we can rebuild." She was right, of course. The bakery wasn't just a business. It was a testament to everything we had endured. And while the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. We weren't done yet. Years have passed since the bakery empire we built crumbled, and life looks very different now. Karen and I, both in our early 60s, have found a rhythm that no longer revolves around spreadsheets, production schedules, and grand expansion plans. Instead, we've embraced the simplicity and peace that comes with letting go of relentless ambition. Our little suburban bakery, the one we were left with after everything fell apart, has become our haven. It's no longer a bustling hub or a brand name on everyone's lips, but it's ours. It keeps us grounded, pays the bills, and brings in just enough to live comfortably. Karen bakes a few mornings a week, focusing on the recipes she loves most. Buttery croissants, rustic loaves of sourdough, and her famous lemon tarts. I handle the front counter, greeting familiar faces and chatting with customers who have become friends over the years. We no longer aim for rapid growth or bigger opportunities. The bakery is small by design, its charm rooted in its intimacy. Regulars stop by not just for the bread, but for the sense of community we've nurtured. Parents bring their children, telling us stories of how they came here as kids themselves. It's humbling and heartwarming, a reminder of the legacy we never intended but are grateful to have built. Karen and I have shifted our focus to the things we once sacrificed for the sake of the business. Our children, now adults, are thriving in their own lives. We've made a conscious effort to be present for them in ways we couldn't during our busiest years. Weekly dinners, long phone calls, and spontaneous weekend visits have become a cherished routine. Watching them carve out their paths fills us with pride, and we're finally in a position to support them without the shadow of the bakery looming over every decision. Travel, once a distant dream, has become a priority. Karen and I have spent the past few years exploring places we once only saw in magazines or heard about from customers. We've walked hand in hand through the lavender fields of Provence, marveled at the ancient ruins of Greece, and savored street food in bustling markets across Southeast Asia. Each trip feels like a gift, a chance to reconnect with the world and with each other. The bakery still anchors us, but it no longer defines us. It's a part of our lives, not the whole of it. We've found joy in its simplicity, in knowing that we're providing something meaningful without losing ourselves in the process. Karen often says it reminds her of the early days, before the expansion, when we worked side by side in a tiny kitchen with nothing but hope and flour dust in the air. As we look toward the future, our goals are modest but deeply fulfilling. We want to continue sharing small moments with our family, whether it's teaching our grandchildren how to knead dough or watching sunsets from our backyard. Karen has taken up painting, filling our home with landscapes that capture the places we visited. I've rediscovered my love for woodworking, spending quiet afternoons crafting furniture and little keepsakes. Looking back on our journey, I see it as a tapestry of triumphs and trials, woven together by resilience and love. The bakery was never just a business. It was a reflection of who we were at each stage of our lives. It taught us to dream, to fight, to adapt, and ultimately, to let go. We often reminisce about the highs and lows, the laughter and the tears, the lessons learned along the way. But more than anything, we cherish the clarity that has come with age and experience. Success, we've realized, isn't about how much you build or earn. It's about finding balance, nurturing relationships, and living a life that feels true to who you are. Karen and I may no longer be chasing the next big thing, but we found something even more valuable, contentment. And as the days roll on, filled with the aroma of fresh bread and the warmth of shared stories, we know we've found our way home.